He entered the old concert hall quietly carrying a weight that did not match his small size. The building smelled of polished wood and history, and every sound echoed longer than expected. Rows of seats stretched out before him, filled with well-dressed people who belonged to this world in a way he never had. He was there because music was the only thing that ever made sense to him, not success, not approval, only the feeling of keys beneath his fingers and sound filling empty spaces the boy had grown up far from. Places like this, his days were shaped by struggle, and his nights by practice on a worn piano that barely stayed in tune. He learned music by listening and repeating. No teacher, no lessons, only patience and belief. That morning, he followed the sound of rehearsal from outside. The doors were open, the piano was there, and something inside him told him to sit and play. As he walked closer, people noticed him. Some frowned, some whispered, others ignored him completely. He felt every look, but did not let it stop his steps. The piano was large and shining. It reflected light and faces, and a life he had never lived. He climbed onto the bench carefully. His feet did not reach the floor. His hands rested softly on the keys before a single note could be played. The conductor noticed him. The man was tall and confident with years of authority in his voice. He stood up quickly, anger flashing across his face. He shouted for the boy to stop. He said the piano was not for him. He said poor boys did not belong on stages like this. The room went silent. Every eye turned toward the child. Some expected him to cry, some expected him to run. The boy did neither. He took a slow breath. He closed his eyes. In that moment, the noise of the world faded. There was only memory and music. He remembered long nights playing alone, cold fingers, hungry stomach, but warm sound. His hands began to move, not fast, not loud, but certain. The first notes were gentle. They did not demand attention. They invited it. The sound traveled through the hall, touching walls and hearts. People stopped breathing without realizing it. The conductor froze. The boy played not to prove anything. He played because music lived inside him and needed to come out. His eyes stayed shut, his face calm. Every note carried emotion. He did not know how to speak. The audience forgot where they were, forgot who they were. They only listened. The piano no longer looked grand and unreachable. It sounded human. It sounded honest. The boy did not see the change around him. He only felt the flow of music guiding his hands. Years of silence found a voice. And in that first part of the story, everything began to change. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he continued playing without opening his eyes. The sound grew fuller and stronger, but never harsh. Each movement of his hands showed confidence, shaped by long, lonely hours of practice. The conductor stood frozen near his podium. The anger that had filled his voice moments earlier drained away. He felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Doubt. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. People who had come expecting a rehearsal now found themselves part of something unexpected. The boy played as if no one else existed. His body swayed gently with the rhythm. His breathing stayed steady. The piano responded to his touch as if it recognized him. Every note carried a story, not of luxury or privilege, but of endurance, of quiet nights and silent hope. The hall itself seemed to listen. The echoes softened the space wrapped around the music instead of swallowing it. Some listeners felt memories surface, moments of childhood, moments of being underestimated, moments when they wished someone had listened. The conductor tried to speak, but no sound came out. He realized that stopping the boy now would feel wrong, almost cruel. The orchestra members watched in disbelief. They had trained for years, yet they felt something raw and real flowing from the small figure at the piano. The boy shifted into a melody that felt playful and sad at the same time, light and heavy, simple yet deep. He was not performing a known piece. He was telling his own story through sound, a story without words. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth. She felt tears, but did not wipe them away. She did not want to miss a second. The music grew quieter again, as if the boy was pulling the audience closer, asking them to listen carefully. His fingers moved with precision, not rushed, not forced. Every note landed exactly where it needed to be, nothing extra, nothing missing. The conductor finally lowered his head. He understood that this moment no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the boy. The people who had whispered earlier now sat in complete silence. Judgment had dissolved into respect, into wonder. The boy remained unaware of the shift in the room. His eyes stayed closed, his face relaxed. For him, this was not about approval. It was about release. The piano responded with warmth. The keys felt alive beneath his fingers, as if the instrument had been waiting for someone like him. He remembered practicing on broken keys, on instruments that buzzed and rattled. Yet the music always came now with a piano like this. The sound felt limitless. The melody rose and fell naturally. It did not beg for applause. It simply existed. The conductor felt a tightness in his throat. He realized he had made a mistake, not just today, but many times before. He had judged without listening, assumed without knowing. The boy reached a moment of stillness in the music, a soft pause created by restraint, not fear. The audience leaned in further, afraid to breathe. Then the music continued, stronger, more confident. The sound filled every corner of the hall, not loud, but complete. People felt connected to each other through the shared experience, strangers united by listening. The boy had no idea that lives were shifting around him, that opinions were changing, that respect was being born. He only knew that the music was flowing, and he followed it. The conductor stepped back slowly, allowing the moment to unfold. The orchestra members exchanged glances. They understood that this was rare, something that could not be taught. The boy transitioned into a closing passage, gentle and reflective. The music felt like a conversation coming to a natural end, not forced, not rushed. When the final note faded, the silence remained. No one moved, no one spoke. The boy kept his eyes closed, letting the last vibration settle. He lowered his hands slowly and rested them on his lap. He opened his eyes for the first time. He looked Room he saw faces, transformed expressions, softened eyes filled with something new. He felt confused. He had expected to be stopped, to be told to leave. Instead, he felt warmth, a quiet acceptance. The conductor took a step forward, not to shout, but to speak. His voice came out low and careful. He apologized, not loudly, but sincerely. The boy listened without reacting. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply nodded. The audience began to clap, slowly, not wild, not explosive, but honest. The sound grew as more hands joined, respect replacing shock. The boy stood up uncertainly. He was not used to being seen. The conductor motioned for him to stay, to take his place. The boy looked down at the piano, once more touched the edge lightly. He had come to play, and he had been heard. This moment would follow him, though he did not know it yet. And the story was only beginning. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he stood near the piano, unsure of what to do next. The applause continued, steady and warm, filling the hall with a feeling he had never experienced before. It was not loud praise, meant to impress. It was recognition. The conductor raised his hand gently, and the clapping slowly faded. The room returned to silence. But it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer tense or judgmental. It was respectful. The conductor looked at the boy carefully. He no longer saw a poor child who did not belong. He saw talent shaped by struggle and patience. He asked the boy his name. The boy answered softly, his voice almost lost in the large space. The simplicity of the moment made it feel real. The conductor asked where he had learned to play. The boy explained in simple words that he learned by listening and practicing alone. He spoke without pride or shame, just truth. The musicians in the orchestra exchanged glances. They understood how rare that kind of discipline was. Many of them had trained for years with teachers and guidance. The conductor took a deep breath and asked the boy if he would play once more. This, not as a mistake, but as an invitation. The boy hesitated, not because he lacked courage, but because he did not want to disappoint. He nodded slowly and returned to the bench. He adjusted his position, carefully placed his hands on the keys again. This time, he opened his eyes for a brief moment. He looked at the piano, at the instrument that had just changed how people saw him. Then he closed his eyes. Once more, the second piece began, differently, more confident, more expressive. The music carried a sense of freedom, as if something heavy had been lifted. The audience leaned back, allowing the sound to move through them. No one whispered, no one shifted impatiently. The conductor stepped aside completely. He gave the moment fully to the boy. The music told a longer story, this time a story of wandering, of waiting, of quiet hope. Each section flowed naturally, no rush, no fear. The boy felt something new. He felt seen, not watched, not judged, but understood. That feeling changed how he played. His hands moved with trust. His heart felt open. The orchestra members listened closely. Some felt humbled, others felt inspired. They remembered why they had chosen music in the first place. A man in the audience closed his eyes. He had come tired and distracted. Now he felt present. A young woman felt tears fall without resistance. She did not know why, only that the music touched something deep. The boy played until the final note rested gently in the air. He did not rush to stop. He allowed the sound to fade naturally. When silence returned, it felt complete, like the end of a sentence spoken perfectly. The applause this time was stronger, still respectful, but full of admiration. The conductor stepped forward again. This time his voice carried humility. He thanked the boy. He admitted that he had been wrong. He said, talent does not belong to wealth or status. The words mattered not because they were public, but because they were honest. The boy listened quietly. He did not know how to respond. He was not used to adults admitting mistakes. The conductor asked the audience to welcome the boy, not as a guest, but as a musician. The applause rose once more. The boy stood slowly, his face calm, but his chest tight with emotion. He bowed slightly, without knowing why. It felt like the right thing to do. After the moment settled, the rehearsal resumed, but nothing felt the same. The orchestra played differently, more carefully, more connected. The boy was invited to sit and listen. Someone brought him water. Someone asked if he was comfortable. Small gestures that meant everything. During a break, the conductor sat beside him. He asked about his life, his family, his dreams. The boy answered honestly. He spoke of difficulty, of playing wherever he could. The conductor listened without interruption. He realized how narrow his world had been. He told the boy that opportunities existed, that help could be offered. The boy did not immediately accept. He had learned to survive on his own. But he listened. That day ended quietly. No announcements, no promises made publicly, but something had shifted permanently. When the boy left the hall, the air outside felt different, lighter, wider. He walked home carrying the memory with him. He did not know how far it would reach, only that it had changed him. He no longer felt invisible. The piano, the hall, the shout that once tried to stop him, all of it had led to this moment. And his journey was just beginning. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he woke the next morning, with the memory of the hall still fresh in his body. The piano seemed to linger in his ears, even in the quiet of his small room. For a moment he wondered if the day before had truly happened, or if it was only a dream shaped by hope. His room was simple, with little furniture and soft morning light entering through a narrow window. Nothing around him had changed, yet he felt different inside. There was a sense of calm mixed with uncertainty. He prepared himself for the day as he always did, slow movements, careful steps, a habit learned from living without certainty. As he stepped outside, the world felt the same. People hurried past, cars moved along the streets. Life continued without noticing the shift that had happened within him. Yet he carried something new, a quiet confidence that did not demand attention. Later that day, he returned to the hall not to perform, but to listen. He was not sure why he went. Something inside him pulled him back. The doors were open again. The orchestra was rehearsing. This time, when people noticed him, their expressions were different. No whispers, no dismissive looks, only curiosity and recognition. Someone greeted him kindly and asked him to sit wherever he felt comfortable. The words surprised him. He was used to being told where he did not belong. He sat quietly near the back, and listened. The music sounded fuller than before. He noticed details he had not heard earlier during a break. The conductor approached him. There was no trace of anger in his face, only thoughtfulness. He asked if the boy would consider returning again. Not just as a visitor, but as someone welcome. The boy listened carefully. He felt cautious. Trust did not come easily. The conductor spoke slowly, choosing his words. He said he had thought deeply about the moment from the day before. He said it had reminded him why music mattered. The boy nodded. He did not promise anything, but he did not refuse. Over the following days, the boy returned often, sometimes to listen, sometimes to play quietly. When invited, each visit felt less intimidating. Each step inside the hall felt more natural. People began to greet him by name, small acknowledgments that built confidence. He practiced more deliberately, not out of fear of being unseen, but out of desire to grow. At night, he reflected on how quickly things could change. One moment of courage, one decision to sit and play. He did not feel proud in a loud way. He felt grateful. The conductor began offering guidance, not instruction, but conversation. They spoke about music, about listening, about restraint. The boy absorbed these discussions quietly. He valued learning without pressure. The orchestra members slowly accepted him as part of their space. They did not treat him like a child, they treated him like a musician. This respect mattered more than applause. One afternoon, the conductor asked him to play during rehearsal, not as a test, but as collaboration. The boy felt nervous, but ready. He played with awareness, listening to the room, responding to the energy. The music blended with the orchestra in a way he had never experienced. He felt connected rather than alone. When the rehearsal ended, there was no celebration, only nods of approval, quiet smiles. That night, he walked home under a sky filled with soft clouds. He felt tired, but peaceful. He realized that music had opened a door, but walking through it required patience. He thought about the words shouted at him earlier, how they had tried to stop him, how they no longer held power. He understood that people often reacted from fear, not truth. This realization gave him strength. He knew challenges would still come. Acceptance was not permanent, it had to be earned continuously. But he felt ready. The piano was no longer just a place of escape, it was becoming a place of connection. And with that understanding, his journey moved forward quietly and steadily. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he woke before sunrise, with the memory of the concert hall still living inside his body. The sound of the piano felt close even though the room around him was silent. For a moment, he stayed still, trying to understand what had changed. The small room where he slept looked the same, plain walls, a narrow bed, a chair by the window, nothing new, yet he felt unfamiliar to himself. He sat up slowly and placed his feet on the floor. The cold reminded him of where he came from. It grounded him. He washed his face and looked at his reflection. The boy in the mirror did not look different, but his eyes carried something new, a calm he had never seen before. He simple breakfast and stepped outside. The street was already awake. People moved with purpose. No one noticed him. And for the first time, that did not hurt. He walked without hurry, letting the city sounds blend together, cars, voices, footsteps. His mind returned again and again to the moment when the shouting stopped, to the silence that followed, to the way the room listened. He wondered if that respect would last, or if it had only been temporary. Later that day, he found himself walking back toward the concert hall. He did not plan it. His feet simply carried him there. The doors were open again. Music floated out into the street. Not piano this time, strings and breath. He stood outside listening. Part of him felt unsure, part of him felt invited. He stepped inside. People noticed him, but no one stared, no one whispered. A man near the entrance nodded and smiled. That small gesture meant more than words. He took a seat near the back, chose a place where he could observe. The orchestra played. The conductor guided them calmly. Everything felt slower than before, more intentional. During a pause, the conductor looked toward him. Their eyes met briefly. There was no tension. After the break, the conductor approached. His voice was softer than the day before. He said the music had stayed with him. He said it had reminded him of something important, something he had forgotten. The boy listened without interrupting. He did not rush to respond. The conductor asked if he would return again, not as a visitor, but as someone welcome. The boy felt uncertainty rise. He had learned not to trust quickly. He nodded once, a simple answer. From that day on, he returned often, sometimes just to listen, sometimes to sit quietly near the piano. Each visit felt lighter. The space felt less intimidating. People began to speak to him, ask his name, ask how long he had been playing. He answered honestly, without embellishment. The piano no longer felt distant. It felt familiar, like an old friend. In a new place, he practiced with more focus, not because he felt pressure, but because he felt possibility. At night, he thought about how one moment had shifted everything, how close he had been to turning away, how easily fear could have won. He understood now that courage did not always feel brave. Sometimes it felt quiet and unsure. The conductor began sitting with him during breaks. They spoke about music, about listening, about patience. There were no lessons, no instructions, just conversation. That respect mattered. The orchestra members began to acknowledge him, not as a child, but as a fellow musician. This acceptance settled slowly, not loudly. One afternoon, the conductor invited him to play during rehearsal, not alone, but alongside them. The boy felt nervous. His hands trembled slightly, but he sat down. He played carefully, listening, adjusting. The sound blended, not perfectly, but honestly. When it ended, there was no applause, only understanding. That night, he walked home under fading light. His steps felt steady. He realized that being seen did not mean being safe forever, but it meant being given a chance, and he intended to honor that chance. The journey ahead still felt long, but it no longer felt empty. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he began to settle into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but steady. Each day no longer felt like something to survive, but something to enter with care. Returning to the hall became part of his routine. Some days he played, some days he only listened. Both felt important. The piano was no Longer an object of fear or distance, it felt like a place where he belonged without having to explain himself. The conductor watched his progress quietly. He did not rush the boy. He allowed space for growth. They spoke often about listening not only to music, but to people, to silence, to oneself. These conversations stayed with the boy long after he left the hall. He began to listen differently to the world around him. He noticed how sounds carried emotion, how footsteps could sound rushed or calm, how voices revealed more than words. This awareness slowly entered his playing. His music became more intentional, more grounded. People began to notice, not in loud ways, but in how they stayed to listen. One afternoon, a few musicians invited him to sit with them during a break. They spoke casually, asked about his favorite composers, shared stories of their own struggles. He realized then that even those who seemed confident carried doubt. That struggle was not unique to him. This understanding made him feel less alone. At home, he practiced with a new mindset, not pushing himself endlessly, but allowing rest. He learned that care was part of discipline, that exhaustion did not equal dedication. Some nights, he dreamed of the piano, not of applause, but of sound filling empty rooms. He woke with gratitude rather than fear. The conductor eventually suggested that the boy perform during a small public rehearsal. Not announced, not advertised. The idea made his chest tighten, but he agreed. On the day of the rehearsal, the hall filled. Slowly, friends of musicians, a few visitors, nothing grand. He sat at the piano with calm focus. He remembered the shouting from before, but it no longer held power. He played with clarity, with restraint, with honesty. The music did not try to impress, it tried to connect. When he finished, there was quiet appreciation, nods, soft smiles. The conductor thanked him simply. The moment felt complete. Afterward, the boy walked home feeling steady. He did not replay every note. He did not search for flaws. He felt content. Days passed, weeks followed. The boy continued to grow, not quickly, but deeply. He learned that trust was built through consistency, through showing up. The hall no longer felt like borrowed space. It felt shared. He still remembered where he came from, still carried humility, but he no longer carried shame. One evening, as he left the hall, the conductor walked beside him. He said something that stayed with the boy. He said, "Talent opens doors, but character keeps them open." The boy nodded. He understood. He returned home under a quiet sky, his steps unhurried. He realized that the moment when he was shouted at had not broken him, it had revealed him. And now he was learning how to live in that truth. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. He began to notice how his presence in the hall no longer felt temporary. People expected to see him there, not out of obligation, but out of familiarity. This realization did not make him proud. It made him careful. He understood that trust once given could be lost, so he treated every day as a chance to earn it again. His practice became more focused. He no longer played only what felt easy. He explored difficult passages, not to prove skill, but to understand sound more deeply. The conductor continued to observe without pressure, sometimes offering a thought, sometimes remaining silent. That silence often taught more than instruction. The boy learned how restraint shaped music, how holding back could say more than force. This lesson extended beyond the piano, in conversations and reactions and choices. He became slower to speak, more attentive. Other musicians began to include him, naturally inviting him to sit nearby, asking his opinion. At first, he answered carefully, unsure if his voice carried weight. Over time, he spoke more freely. He learned that being heard did not require loudness, only honesty. One afternoon, a violinist shared a story of failure, a missed opportunity, a harsh judgment. The boy listened and recognized himself in the story. He understood then that pain connected people quietly. This understanding softened him. Further, outside the hall, his life remained simple. He still lived modestly, still walked instead of writing, still counted carefully, but something inside him had changed. He no longer felt invisible, and because of that, he no longer felt the need to hide. Music began to follow him into other spaces. A small community center invited him to play, then a school, then a quiet gathering. He accepted cautiously, not wanting attention to outpace growth. Each performance felt like a conversation, not a display. He watched faces, listened to the room, adjusted people, responded with stillness, with presence. The conductor attended one of these small events, quietly standing at the back. Afterward, he spoke few words, but his expression showed respect. He told the boy that growth was visible not just in sound, but in character. The words stayed with him. The boy began teaching himself pieces. He once avoided music that required patience and emotional control. He struggled, he failed, he returned. This persistence felt different from before. It was not driven by fear of being dismissed, but by desire to understand. At times, old doubts returned, whispers of unworthiness, of accident. When this happened, he returned to the basic, simple scales. Breathing, listening. The piano remained his anchor. One evening, the hall hosted a small open rehearsal. The conductor invited the boy to begin. No announcement, no explanation. The boy walked to the piano, calmly sat, closed his eyes. The room settled. He played with clarity, no rush, no force. The sound carried maturity beyond his years, not because of technique, but because of experience. When he finished, the room remained quiet for a moment, then resumed. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, yet something meaningful had been shared. The boy returned home feeling grounded. He realized that this was what belonging felt like, not celebration, but acceptance. He no longer defined himself by the words shouted at him. Those words had lost their power. Instead, he defined himself by consistency, by listening, by presence. The journey ahead still held uncertainty, but it no longer felt threatening. He had learned that identity was not granted by permission, it was built through action, and he was building it day by day, key by key. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. He reached a point where the hall no longer felt like a place he was borrowing, it felt like a space He helped shape simply by being there. People no longer spoke about the moment. When he had first played, they spoke about what he was working on now, what he was learning, what he was becoming. This shift mattered to him. It meant he was no longer defined by one event, but by consistency. He continued to arrive early and leave quietly, not seeking attention, not avoiding it either. Music had become part of his daily structure: morning practice, afternoon listening, evening reflection. This rhythm gave his life balance, something he had never known before. The conductor began trusting him with more responsibility, asking him to play during collaborative sessions, inviting his input. These invitations were subtle but meaningful. The boy responded with humility. He listened carefully before speaking. He played thoughtfully. He understood that respect grew when paired with restraint. Other young musicians began noticing him. Some asked how he learned, some asked how he stayed calm. He answered simply. He said he listened, he practiced, he waited. These answers surprised people. They expected secrets. They found patience outside the hall. His world slowly expanded. Opportunities appeared gradually: a scholarship discussion, an invitation to study formally. These possibilities felt overwhelming at first. He had survived without expecting support. Now he had to learn how to receive it. The conductor spoke to him honestly. He said that talent carried responsibility, not pressure, but awareness. He encouraged the boy to choose paths that allowed growth without losing himself. The boy reflected deeply on these words. He did not rush decisions. He had learned the value of timing. At home, he thought often about identity, about who he was becoming. Beyond the piano, he realized music was not his entire self, it was a voice within a larger story. This realization brought peace. When he played now, the sound carried maturity, not sadness, not anger. Understanding audiences responded differently. They listened longer. They stayed quiet after the final note. He noticed that silence could be a form of respect. One evening, a small group stayed behind after rehearsal. They thanked him quietly, not for performance, but for presence. These words stayed with him. He began mentoring a younger child who reminded him of himself. Quiet, curious, uncertain. He did not teach technique, he taught listening. He showed the child how to sit, how to breathe, how to let sound arrive naturally. This role felt grounding. It reminded him of how far he had come. The conductor watched this interaction from a distance. He felt something close to pride, not ownership, but gratitude. He knew that moment of shouting had been a turning point, not because it was harsh, but because it was challenged. The boy had not responded with anger, he had responded with music. That response had reshaped everything. As time passed, the boy prepared for a transition: formal study, new environments. The thought brought both excitement and fear. He walked through the hall one evening after everyone had left. The space was quiet, empty. He sat at the piano one last time before the change, not to perform, but to thank. He played softly, letting the sound settle. He thought about the boy who had walked in uninvited, and the person he was now. The journey had not erased hardship, it had integrated it. When he stood to leave, he felt ready, not because he knew what would happen, but because he trusted himself. The hall would continue, the piano would remain, but he would carry what he learned everywhere, and that was enough. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, he left the hall on a quiet morning, carrying nothing but a small bag and a deep sense of readiness. The streets outside looked ordinary, yet they felt new to him. Every step forward felt chosen rather than forced. The piano stayed behind. Its presence remained with him, not as an object, as a memory of listening and being listened to. He entered a new place of study, where the environment was structured and demanding. There were rules, schedules, expectations. At first the change felt heavy, but he remembered what he had learned, that growth did not come from fear, it came from attention. He listened carefully to teachers and classmates. He did not rush to show what he could do. He allowed time to understand the space. When he played, others noticed something different, not speed, not volume, but calm. He carried the hall with him into every room. The patience, the restraint, the awareness. Challenges came as they always do, moments of doubt, comparisons, fatigue. When they arrived, he returned to basics: breathing, listening, honesty. Music continued to be his guide, not pushing him forward, but grounding him. He stayed in contact with the conductor. Their conversations were brief, but meaningful. Updates, encouragement, respect. The conductor followed his progress with quiet pride. He spoke of him not as a discovery, but as a reminder of what listening could reveal. The boy grew into his work, not chasing recognition, but allowing it to follow naturally. People responded to his presence. They trusted his sound. They felt it. He never forgot where he came from, not the struggle, not the words shouted at him. Those memories no longer hurt. They informed, they reminded him that dignity could be claimed, not granted. He began sharing his story when asked, not as inspiration, but as truth. He told others that silence mattered, that courage could be quiet, that listening could change everything. Years later, he returned to the old hall, not as a guest, but as an invited musician. The space looked the same. The piano stood where it always had. He touched the keys gently, not to prove anything, but to remember. The conductor sat in the audience, no longer leading, simply listening. The boy, now a young man, played, eyes closed, sound steady. The hall listened again. There was no shouting, no doubt. Only music, only presence. When the final note settled, there was no rush to respond. The silence held respect. He opened his eyes, looked out at the room, and felt complete, not because the past was erased, but because it had found its place. He bowed lightly and stepped away, carrying the same humility he had learned long ago. The story that began with rejection had ended with understanding, not triumph, not revenge, growth. And that was enough. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.